guys. So I'm going to be back this hour and I'm going to be doing another reading from the book that I've been reading here on my channel. It's called The Atlantean Conspiracy, and I do want to give a little bit of like a trigger warning type thing. This is a very controversial book, but I think there's a lot of good truths in it. I don't agree with every single sentence that is stated in all the books I read here. Normally if I want to read the book on my channel, it's because there are some, nuggets of truth and wisdom that I like from the book, and so I'm going to read that. This book especially, it talks about various secret societies, various false flags. It gives a lot of good primary sources to back up many of these claims, but a lot of them are controversial. I would just like throw it out there. I recommend to you, if something does not sit well with you, try to find, try to think about why this person is saying this. Look at the primary sources that are given. If you're going to disprove it, disprove the sources. Don't just make an emotional response to it. Okay, so this subheading, it's called 9/11. And guys, feel free to put all comments or questions in the comment section. This subheading is 9/11. The official story of what happened on 9/11, backed by both the Bush administration and the King's Commission investigation, is as follows. On September 11, 2001, 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists under the direction of Osama bin Laden hijacked 4 commercial airliners, flew 2 into the World Trade Center tower, 1 into the Pentagon, and crashed the last in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after a passenger revolt on board. The 2 Trade Center towers burned for 56 and 103 minutes, respectively, before collapsing symmetrically at near free-fall speed into their own footprint. Another building not hit by a plane, the 47-story World Trade Center 7 building, also collapsed at free-fall speed many hours later, allegedly due to internal fires and structural damage from falling debris. This Building 7, this is going to be a key. So please just look up Building 7 when it comes to 9/11. That's really something interesting. While on the surface, this explanation for the 9/11 events may seem plausible, it does not stand up to critical scrutiny. To begin with, oh hi friend. To begin with, if the official story is true, World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7, and all made history on, Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 all made history on 9/11 by being the first and only steel frame buildings ever to collapse from fire or a plane crash. Steel frame buildings have burned for up to 28 hours, gutting the entire interiors, but still not collapsed. The Empire State Building was hit by a B-25 and never collapsed. Hundreds of architects and engineers at AE911truth.org and WTC designer/architect Minoru Yamasaki himself have expressed repeatedly that the World Trade Center buildings were specifically built to withstand an airplane collision of that magnitude. There even used to be an information sign at the top assuring visitors of just that. And since the building stood strong for a good hour after impact, it is safe to say the collapses were not caused by the plane crashes. The official story states that fires from burning jet fuel weakened the building's steel beams until they gave way and collapsed. In the past, all over the world, steel buildings have burned uncontrollably for about 20 hours, completely disseminating every floor and not collapsed. Not once in history had one fallen from fire until 9/11, when WTC buildings 1, 2, and 7 supposedly all did. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, reports that the temperatures of jet fuel fires do not exceed 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and steel does not begin to melt until 2800 degrees. This means they would have us believe jet fuel fires burning 1000 degrees below steel's melting point for only 56 and 103 minutes on only 8 and 5 floors respectively was enough to bring down the Twin Towers. Even giving them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that jet fuel fires did somehow weaken the steel frames enough to bring down the buildings, how is it possible that they collapsed at the speed of gravity? The official story is that fire-induced structural failure caused each floor to collapse and pancake on top of one another. This pancake theory, however, is seriously at odds with Newton's gravitational theory. Can we be friends? Yes, we can absolutely be friends. All right, here's a quote from David Icke. In order for a floor to fall, hundreds of joints had to break almost simultaneously on 236 exterior columns and 47 core columns. For a 1,300-foot building, 10 seconds is almost free fall speed. But if each floor produced just a little resistance, so that breaking through each one took a half second, the collapse of all of these floors, 80 or 95 of them, would have taken 40 to 47 seconds. Can we really believe that the upper part of the buildings encountered virtually no resistance from the lower parts? The problem would be even worse in relation to the North Tower. At least if Hushman is right to say that it fell in 8 seconds, which would be exactly free fall speed. How, he asks, could the debris crush 100 steel and concrete floors while falling as fast as objects fall through air? End quote. Oh, thank you, Angela. News footage, firefighters, ground zero workers, and other witnesses reported molten metal flowing out of windows preceding the collapse, and huge pools collected in the basement area, remaining in molten form for over 5 weeks. For fire to produce molten steel, it absolutely must be over 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and jet fuel burns at 1,000 degrees cooler than that. What can account for this? Professor Stephen Jones, a physics professor at BYU, points out that thermite combustion is a process used in controlled demolitions, which produces high-temperature molten metal. In his paper, Why Indeed Did the WTC Buildings Collapse?, Jones wrote, quote, molten metal was repeatedly observed and formally reported in the rubble piles of the WTC towers and WTC-7, metal that looked like molten steel or perhaps iron. I maintain that these observations are consistent with the use of high-temperature cutter charges such as thermite, HDX, or RDX, or some combination thereof, routinely used to melt/cut/demolish steel, end quote. The idea that explosive charges were placed inside the building is supported by literally hundreds of eyewitnesses, seismic recordings, video footage, and Isaac Newton. Firefighters and scores of witnesses on CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS all talked about bombs going off that day. But once Osama bin Laden had been blamed, it was never again addressed by the mainstream media or the Keane Commission. Teresa Valise, for one, was working on the 47th floor of the North Tower when Flight 11 hit. She was quoted saying, quote, "Oh, thank you, General. There were explosions going off everywhere. I was convinced that there were bombs planted all over the place, and someone was sitting at a control panel pushing detonator buttons. There was another explosion and another. I didn't know where to run," end quote. Live on ABC, as one of the towers came down, Peter Jennings commented, quote, "Anybody who has ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you are going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down," end quote. After Building 7 came down, Dan Rather, live on CBS News, said, "For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down," end quote. One of the firefighters up in the second tower, Louis Cacchioli, told People Weekly that, quote, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building," end quote. William Rodriguez, a janitor in sublevel 1 of the World Trade Center, testified to bombs exploding in the basement several seconds before the planes even hit the buildings. His testimony was completely ignored by the 9/11 Commission report. Oh, thank you. Also, seismographic data from a nearby observatory showed 2 spikes of 2.1 and 2.3 Richter at the instant the collapses began. This too indicates explosive charges because if the tower simply pancaked down, the seismographic spikes would happen when the massive debris hit the ground, not at the start of the collapse. In all, the number of people claiming to see, hear, detect, or suspect bombs in the buildings is staggering. Add to this the visual evidence from footage of the collapse, in which demolitions experts have pointed out squibs characteristic of controlled implosions. Squibs are charges that go off early below the line of detonation as the buildings are coming down. If you play the Twin Towers collapses in slow motion, you will notice dozens of squibs blowing out the sides ahead of time.